Fun fact, in 2025, travellers faced one of the densest periods of visa changes in history. I'm talking 9/11 COVID sort of stuff. But this time it wasn't driven by security concerns or some big health risk. This time it was biometrics, digital apps, and political shifts that is causing all the border chaos. The US is restricting those of certain nationalities. Australasia is opening up for those of certain nationalities. Asia's making it easier for short-term travellers, while the EU is making it harder and requiring a lot more information. Keeping up with all the changes is kind of tricky, but absolutely necessary for anyone who's a traveller. So in this video, I'm giving you an overall review of what's been happening around the world and a bit of a look into the trends and what we might need to think about for 2026. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half, and I love to travel, but I also like to keep myself informed. So I keep an eye on what's happening in the travel world and I update you every week. But today I'm actually looking back over the past year at everything that's been changing around the rules and regulations that let us go from one country to another. Because 2025 has actually seen a significant amount of change. And there's a few reasons around that, lots of diverse reasons, but there's three sort of main groups of reasons which I think it's really important to take note of because that'll signal the trends for coming up year. So first of all, what's actually been happening? Well, I can't give you a specific list because it would take me hours, and also there's no huge one database that covers it all. Some of them are just little tweaks, some of them have been quite significant, and we're talking about changes to short-term tourist visas, long-term residency visas, work visas, student visas, all different sorts of types. There are a couple of trackers that have a look at this. One's called Sherpa, another is Visa Verge. I've made a little image, a pop-up kind of infographic thing that shows you the number of main changes in main countries, but I'm not covering all of them. When you put it all together, there turns out to have been over 100 plus changes in the past year. That's double what there was in the 2024 period. And some of this change is actually fueled responding change. So some of it is tit for tat reciprocity. As one country changes its rules for certain nations, those nations changes its rules to kind of counteract either favorably or not so favorably. For example, the US put up a lot of restrictions for certain nations, and Brazil for one hit back by adding an $80 visa requirement for US citizens. So we can definitely say that the last 12 months has seen a lot of change. But when you look back over the data from 2025, you can see some basic trends. You can make a few generalizations, and that's what we're going to talk through today. So one trend is that Western countries, the EU, the UK, US, Canada, Australia, seem to be closing down their borders, making it slightly harder to get in. There's bans and caps and digital authorization needed, just an added layer. In contrast, Asia, the Gulf, South America and Africa seem to be opening up and making it easier with waivers and faster e-visas. But these are just basic trends. The actual reality on the ground is a little bit more nuanced. The only real generalization we can make is that everybody's making changes. And there seems to be three main groups of reasons for this: technology, economics, and geopolitical realignment. In technology, formally we could say that technological advancements have made it easier for border management. In my translation, AI means we can gather a lot more data off a lot more people quicker. That means we can control more people, so why not? Economically, it's said that post-COVID we need to make an economic rebalance, and tourism is helping with that, but also address housing shortages, which tourism is not helping with. So that becomes a bit of a balancing act. And when it comes to geopolitical realignments, that's often combined with national security. What it means is capitalizing on racist sentiment to win elections. I'm getting cynical in my old age. It's Western countries in particular that are using the migration crisis and national security to tighten up their borders. One example is the much publicized social media vetting which the US have put into place. It's changed things drastically for those wanting to enter the United States. Social media vetting requires you to make your online presence public, and this includes all your posts, your Facebook profile, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn even, and anywhere you might be recorded on a digital database. And this is all screened to check to see if you pose a risk to national security. Any content that shows hostility towards the United States, towards US citizens, or towards US culture, any misuse of tech, and any previous censorship, any support for groups they've labelled terrorist groups. Anti-US hostility includes support for Hamas or criticising the US founding principles. Now, I double checked, and apparently criticising abortion or gun laws does not count because it's not the founding principles. They're really only supposed to be looking for posts that go against the constitutional protection of life and liberty, as per the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. So if you've been involved in routine debates around abortion or gun laws or other such issues, you should be okay. But if those debates have turned into a bit of a rant, or if in any way you've threatened anybody or groups of people, called for violence or talked about overthrowing the system, yeah, that's not so great. You will be flagged for that. This means you'll either be interviewed, delayed, or denied entry. So the US first piloted this as a voluntary social media disclosure, but then in June 2025, it became mandatory for all student visas. And then in December, it was extended to work visas, dependents, family visas, and they've been adding on to the list of social media that will be interrogated. So as a result, around about 1,700 student visas have been revoked, and you can expect a 1 to 2 week delay in your applications. Plus, it's inspired other nations to copy the idea. While the US has the most formalised system, other countries are now starting to use it to flag perceived risks, sometimes informally, sometimes quite explicitly. So there are at least 10 other nations that use it now, and this includes the UK, Australia, China, India, Singapore, and some Latin American countries. And meanwhile, Japan, Taiwan, South Africa, Hungary, and the Middle East are all preparing policies to introduce social media vetting sometime in 2026. Supporters of digital media vetting say it's long overdue, arguing it will find modern threats in a world where a person's digital footprint reveals their true intent. Apparently it's going to keep us all more honest. I don't think this has ever been the case historically. Doesn't it just make people hide? Another argument is it's a more efficient and targeted way to go about things. We don't have to put a blanket ban on every sort of nationality that we think might be dodgy. We can just pick out specific people. Meanwhile, critics see it as mass surveillance. And full disclosure, it does scare me a little. I am far from a conspiracy junkie, but you have to admit, systems like this do leave us open to mass control. It does make the whole freedom of speech things feel a little less safe. There's just potential for creep in the system, and we've seen that already in 2025 as it gets extended. And so it is worrying that it could be open to abuse of power. You might be punished for political views like posting a Palestinian flag or attending a protest. And that leads people to self-censor, especially if you're worried that not just you will be labelled, but all your contacts will be labelled by association. It's kind of McCarthyism, Red Scare territory. And then of course there's all the privacy invasion issues and the data safety risks. Of course, we need to remember there are some very stringent privacy laws in action in most of these countries, like GDPR in the EU and the US Cloud Act. So we should feel safe, I guess. But other critics have argued it's not actually that effective anyway, so why take the risk? There are claims that it actually doesn't work to target real threats. So all it does is slow down the process without actually adding any safety gains. Nevertheless, it's one of the ways countries are tightening down their borders, restricting the numbers of people who can come in and how long they can stay for. Because it's not just short-term travel that's being restricted, Residency visas are also being cut down. Over 2025, several EU countries slashed their long-term visa programs due to housing shortages. Spain, for example, estimates it's 9.6 million houses short. Portugal is another one that's phasing out its property golden visa program, as are Ireland, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Austria, all reviewing their visa and work permits. So travellers looking for long-term stays are going to have to broaden their horizons. You're now more likely to get a residency or a work or student visa in places like the Gulf or Asia. But the biggest changes to visa regulations has really been technology. AI in particular has made it faster to gather and to control more data and to connect more systems. And the tech makes it easier to roll out changes. For example, in the US, the ESTA added the requirement for headshots. And this is relatively easy to roll out and implement with a simple tech update. And the UK has introduced its ETA, Electronic Travel Authorization. And honestly, this is really simple and quick to do online. I had to do it myself and it didn't take very long at all, and I got the response fairly quickly too. The price has now gone up. It was £10, I think, when I did it. It's now $16. But it does last for a couple of years. And they have now extended it to just about everybody who's not a UK citizen. So if you're planning a trip to the UK, even if you haven't needed an ETA before, likely you need one now. So double check. The EU introduced fingerprinting. This is mostly to catch overstays. And South Africa is now also using an ETA. Meanwhile, New Zealand is starting to do the reverse. They now no longer require Chinese visitors in particular to apply for an ETA if you already have an Australian one, making it easier for our Chinese guests just to jump across the ditch. This makes our country sound very welcoming to Asian visitors. Hasn't always been that way, and it's a double-edged sword. I'm going to go into this and the history around that in my next video. So if you haven't subscribed already, please do that and hit the notifications bell so you can join me for that one. But basically the overall trend in digitization is to make it faster in automating compliance and automating exclusion. It cuts out all the paper handling, which usually takes time, but it does increase costs. What with all the software interaction, it also increases the security risks around data control. And while the use of data is argued to make things faster, and most of the time it does, sometimes that's for slightly dodgy reasons. For example, in the UK, the ETA has cut down the queues and the waiting time at airports, but that's because the system kicks out those problematic travellers before they get their tickets. Less queues because slightly less people are being accepted for travel. Some research estimates that at border face-to-face refusal of entry has reduced by around about 30%. Essentially, they're screening people they allow to travel in the first place, so that's why the queues are shorter. And alongside some of the major overhauls, there was some just small tweaks. Modernisation. The EU, for example, is currently undergoing its largest modernisation in decades. So their changes are more technical and procedural rather than about who can enter. Most of Western Europe still operates under Schengen rules, but now there is the EES and the ETIAS to consider. You've got to love your acronyms in this business. The EES, or Exit Entry System, is one of the largest operational changes in Schengen in years. Basically, it's replacing all the old paper stamp your passport systems with biometrics. The EES collects face biometrics and fingerprints from all non-EU travellers, even visa-free travellers. It automatically logs entry and exit, so it's tracking the number of days that you're in the EU, and it stores all your information for 3 years, extending that if you overstay. The idea is just to prevent error, which often happens in a paper system, and it applies to all Schengen C visas and all visa exempt. So that includes me from New Zealand, anyone from the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, etc. The impact is reasonably minimal physically. The first time you enter, you need to record your fingerprints and they'll take a scan of your face. So you might need to stand in a queue to do that. And you have to do this before you board the plane. Airlines have to do that before they let you depart. But once you're in the system, that means going in and out over those next 3 years should be pretty simple. And it doesn't change the conditions of entry, it just keeps your data. EES began its phased rollout in October 25, but it's going to be fully rolled out to all ports, so that includes land crossings and seaports, by April 2026. Now another change on top of that which is coming is the ETIAS, which stands for European Travel Information Authorization System. Now that is being delayed in its rollout. It's supposed to be starting about now, but it's being delayed until EES is fully rolled out, so we can expect it maybe in the last quarter of 2026. So ETIAS is another pre-screening system, so just like the ETA in the UK. So an online pre-application process for non-visa travellers. It's expected to cost around about €7. Again, it will last about 3 years, and you'll need it before you get onto any border crossing, plane, train, boat. Like the EES, it's used in automatic security checks, border to border, and also your information will be shared with Interpol, Europol, Schengen Information System, and any national databases. Everyone aged 18 to 70 will have to apply. There will be a transition period and a grace period, so it's probably not until mid-2027 when it's going to be mandatory for everybody. All this data is going to be integrated, and the security will be managed by a system called EULISA, which stands for, I'm going to have to read this one out, I'm sorry, hang on. European Union Agency for Operational Management of Large-Scale IT Systems. Oh wait, it hasn't finished. In the area of freedom, security and justice. I'm not quite sure how they got Lisa from that, but EULISA appoints a DPO to follow Regulation 2018/1725 and is independently supervised by the EDPS and mandated by the GDPR. Individual EU states are making small adjustments which are minor but still noticeable. So France, Germany and Spain, for example, now are doing more online than face-to-face. Again, in an effort to reduce queues. Other countries are changing processing fees or processing times, but this might be due more to staffing rather than actual changes in the regulations. On the whole, the Schengen visa area regulations remain the same, it's just the processes that are changing. But if we jump over to Africa, there's some really exciting changes coming there, and that's one continent to keep your eye on for 2026. Africa is working towards visa-free travel across the continent through the African Union's Free Movement Protocol. The African Union has a 50-year strategic blueprint called Agenda 2063, and one of the initiatives is a borderless continent. So as yet, there's no e-visa that allows you free travel, but it's on its way. And digitization is really helping. Rwanda, Ghana, Seychelles, and the Gambia already are using a system that works really well. And so far, 48 out of the 52 countries allow visa-free access to at least one other nation. Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, Egypt, and Tunisia are all offering now a much faster, easier online system with lower fees and biometrics to replace the paper systems. And the main difference here is that they're using it to open their borders in an attempt to boost tourism. And it seems to be working. There seems to be an increase of around about 15 to 20%. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? I've got a few tips for you. Tip number one is fairly obvious. Think ahead, be prepared. Wherever you're going, don't assume you can just walk in. I think sometimes in the digital world, because things are faster, we tend to be a little bit more spontaneous, which is awesome, and I thought that is what the modern world would be like, but it's not necessarily so. You need to think at least a couple of weeks in advance now, just to double check there's not an extra layer that you need. Most likely it'll be an online electronic form. For most countries, it takes around about 1 to 3 days to process, but in peak times, this can be longer, so you do want to give it a couple of weeks. The cost also varies greatly. Like I said, the UK one's now up to £16, so it's just another thing to add to your budget. And for many countries, you'll have to submit an updated photograph. Fairly easy to do, but it has to be in that particular portrait style, and they have slightly different specifications from country to country. So we found that for Vietnam it had to be a certain size with a certain background, and we happened to be in rural Spain at the time, so we had to find somebody who could take the photo to that specification. So it can be a little bit tricky, and you do need to think ahead. Which leads me to tip number 2, which is keep copies. Even though it feels like everything's digital and online these days, I still print out a copy, and this came out very handy when we were in Asia. Particularly going border to border, sometimes your SIM card's just not going to work for you. We found, particularly in some of the smaller Asian countries and the smaller European countries, Montenegro, Albania for example, paper is always going to be handy to have with you. Sometimes you just can't rely on the internet system. At the very least, keep screenshots on your phone so you can access them even without Wi-Fi. Tip number 3 is keep yourself continuously updated, and I recommend government sites. Rather than asking AI or Google, go to the direct government site, or at the very least double check it. Yes, these sites are a little less user-friendly, but they're the ones that are most likely to have the most updated information. I've put a list in the description below of all the government sites from the main countries. And in particular, if you're a US citizen, you want to check out the reciprocity schedule. Now, this is where some countries have acted in a kind of tit-for-tat sort of way and pushed back against some of the US bans by creating restrictions of their own for US citizens. So on the US site, you will find a pretty in-depth reciprocity schedule which shows you how the US have responded to other countries' visa laws or vice versa. But tip number 4 is just think outside your normal route. One of the upsides of all the Western countries tightening their borders is we might get to see a little bit more of the world. Don't just limit yourself to the US or the UK or even the EU anymore. Think about Asia, think about Africa, and expand your horizons. Malaysia now has a visa on arrival, and I found China's 48-hour visa-free entry was just brilliant. I only had 20 hours in Beijing, but I managed to get to see the Great Wall of China for free. I'm serious. I put the link of the video below because you've got to check it out. Brazil is now increasing its transit waivers, and Argentina and Colombia are introducing digital nomad extensions. These are all affordable and less crowded options for travel. And of course, Africa is the one to keep in mind for 2026. Now, tip number 5 is an interesting one. In my research, a lot of people were suggesting it as a tip. I'm just telling you it's something to consider, and that is cleaning up your social media. I don't want to tell you to do that. A lot of travel sites will now tell you to delete your old posts, double check what you post, and basically make yourself look squeaky clean online. I'm not going to tell you to do that because I would never tell you to erase part of yourself just to fit in with the requirements of others. But I am letting you know that it is something that you need to be aware of so you can make that choice. It's a simple reality of today. Our data is everywhere, and that leaves us vulnerable. So you can decide what you want to do about that. So on that note, I'll leave you thinking. If you come up with any ideas or thoughts, please leave them in the comments below and share this video with somebody else who's a traveller. Don't forget to subscribe because I will be bringing you updated travel news every week. And I'll also keep you updated in my member site. So if you haven't joined there, and make sure you hit the notifications bell. What's going to be happening next week in the travel world? I have no idea, but whatever it is, I hope you will join me so we find out together. Until then, happy travels everyone.